Welcome to the Living Loud and Proud podcast, brought to you by Disability Pride, Pennsylvania. If you need a link to the transcript for this episode, please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org/podcast. And now, here is your host. Hey folks, welcome to the Living Loud and Proud podcast. I'm your host, Phill Rosen, for this episode today. And I have my guest here, Matt Berwick. So just a little bit about him. Oh, and I forgot about Ray for a second there. Ray's my co-host for this episode as well.
How's it going, everybody?
So before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsor for the podcast, Highmark Hole Care.
Yay!
Thanks, guys. You make this possible. All right. So now, Matt Berwick, he currently serves as the Senior Program Manager of Disability Accommodations and Clinical Services for the UPMC Health System in the Disabilities Resource Center and teaches part-time at the University of Pittsburgh. Matthew has worked in the area of disability services for almost a decade, serving on local, state, and national boards for people with disabilities, and currently serves as the president of the United Spinal Association of Western PA, as well as being on the board for Disability Pride Pennsylvania, of course. Prior to joining UPMC, Matthew worked in higher education and as a youth specialist, focusing on youth transition services. Matthew has a BA in elementary education, an MA in adult learning and training, and an MS in health informatics. In addition to the work Matthew does, he is very active in the Pittsburgh disability sports community, playing wheelchair rugby for 20 years with the Pittsburgh Steelwheelers and curling for 16 years with the Pittsburgh Curling Club. Wow, that's a lot right there, Matt.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is.
I have some free time as well.
Oh, well, I hope so. So real quick, before we actually get into the bulk of the episode, which is going to be about adaptive sports, I wanted to just kind of ask you about, serving on the Disability Pride Pennsylvania board. You're out in Allegheny County. We're mostly, in the eastern part of the state, Philly area. So what's that like? Is it important to you? Give us the rundown.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much for having me today. I have to say that Vicky has a way of just encompassing the state in such a way. And when she said, hey, we need some representation from the Pittsburgh area, would you be interested? Of course, I didn't let her get it all the way out of her mouth before I said yes, because anything for Vicky, right? But it's really important as a statewide organization that we do have that representation from the better side of the state. Sorry for those folks in Philly. But we needed to make sure that we had that representation from across the state. I know Chuck is in Harrisburg and the rest of the crew is out there in Philly. But it was important that I said, I'm going to step up. Absolutely, Vicky, anything you need, and make sure that we have that representation from the west side of the state.
Okay. So, Bill, what's the next question we're going to ask? Are we going to ask about what was his draw to adaptive sports?
So, Ray, that's a great question. I have to say, so. Right? So I was 6 days out from my spinal cord injury. So I was 15, had my spinal cord injury, dove off of a railing into the snow in a cold February. And I was drawn to adaptive sports really as soon as I saw it. So 6 days after my spinal cord injury, I was transferred to a rehabilitation hospital out here in Pittsburgh. And it was some of the most amazing things I had ever seen. So wheelchair rugby, people with disabilities, specifically individuals with quadriplegia, just slamming into each other. And I was like, this is the most amazing thing and the wildest thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, I have to try this. So
hold on a second.
Sure.
So am I to understand that within the first year of your injury, you went and got involved in adaptive sports?
Yeah, so there's more to that, Ray. So I spent 3 months in the rehab hospital. Every Sunday, I had the opportunity to watch this great group of people come in from the Pittsburgh Steelwheelers and practice wheelchair rugby. And it's a fine art to seeing the sport. But after that discharge, so 3 months after my discharge, my spinal cord doctor at the time said to my parents and I, we really think he needs to get involved in adaptive sports. And we think it should be wheelchair rugby. And I wasn't alone at the rehab hospital. So my parents had seen it and they knew it was full contact. And they're like, well, he just broke his neck. Like, is it safe for him to go out and slam into each other? And my doctor was like, well, you know, maybe wait a little bit. Let's wait at least 6 months post injury before he does full contact. But I was right there ready to go. And I went out and I mean, there were 20-year veterans that were playing the sport. And I'm like, you know, putting on the red jersey like I'm playing football and it's like no contact. And of course, you know, one of the athletes comes up and just like gives me that gentle tap. And they're like, yeah, we know the doctor said wait till 6 months, but you're fine. We'll just throw you in now. and really, it was like from the first point of contact, I was hooked and I've been playing ever since.
Wow. Matt, you know, like the average story is usually like a couple of years after the injury, at
Right?
the very least.
Yeah.
Wow. And you were so young too.
I was. So I was an athlete before my injury. I was a soccer athlete and played some baseball. And, you know, it's in your blood. Once you're an athlete, you're an athlete. So I had to
I
say,
guess so.
you know, how can I be involved in adaptive sports? And that was it.
Yeah, after you, I guess that is the fact. Once an athlete, always an athlete.
For sure.
Wow. Huh. Okay. So basically, I mean, are there any other sports that you play?
Yeah, so I've tried just about everything. You know, right after my spinal cord injury was when I got into rugby, but I was also interested in water sports as well. So I tried water skiing and kayaking. I'm also a competitive curler. So for those of you that may not know, there's curling, which is the sport with the rock and the ice. And I started that in about 2008. So it took me a little bit of time to find adaptive curling. And it's funny because my sister-in-law is Canadian, and that's, of course, where curling is super popular. And we were getting ready to really hang out with each other. And there was an adaptive sports clinic, a winter sports clinic. And she said, why don't you go try curling? And honestly, it was the stupidest thing I have ever done. I fell in love with it. I was like, this is so stupid, but I love it. So I have been curling since 2008 and really have met some of the most amazing people through adaptive sports. And I think that's what's really the important thing is, you know, it doesn't have to be full contact rugby. It can be something as, I'll say leisurely as curling. But adaptive sports is just an amazing community that you really don't get any other way.
That's great. I mean, that is, wow, that is so amazing, man. I mean, you know, I didn't even know all this was going on. Wow. Okay. Huh. Well, you know what? There's a question here to ask you about how have adaptive sports evolved over the years and what milestones have shaped the current landscape. Now, are we going to be talking about the general thing or just specifically with your experiences?
So I think what the important thing is, from my experience, but generally, right? So adaptive sports have changed exponentially over the years, really, with the advent of technology. You know, when I started playing wheelchair rugby, I was literally pushing around in what felt like 60 pound wheelchair that was just, I feel like it was welded together in somebody's garage. And now, I mean, there's companies that are focused just on making adaptive sports equipment that are top of the line, right? So it is some of the best equipment. And so that's just in the short time that I've been playing, if you want to consider 20 years a short time. But the change in technology from curling is something that is absolutely amazing as well. So when I started curling, it was literally a broomstick that I bought in Canada and a head that you can screw on that you can buy from a curling company that was designed for I'll say, semi-able-bodied individuals that were able to stand and walk to push the stone. So they were stick curlers. And then wheelchair curling came on the scene. And that's really where the technology changed from using a stick that was designed for a stand-up curler to wheelchair curling sticks that are, $400, 3D printed, and absolutely amazing technology.
Huh.
All right, so Matt, I actually kind of want to just circle back to the first kind of answer that you had about wheelchair rugby. A lot of people who may not necessarily know too much about the world of adaptive sports have seen the movie Murderball. Is that the same game? Is that the game that they were showing in the movie?
Yeah, so that's a great example of wheelchair rugby. So that is kind of the original version of Murderball. So if you've seen it, right? So they talk about the name change of why it's now wheelchair rugby as opposed to Murderball. We couldn't get sponsors through the name of the sport being Murderball, so we had to change it over to wheelchair rugby. But we just talked a little bit about the change in technology, and really you can see even in a documentary that came out not that long ago, the change of technology has really seen a change from the time that documentary came out to the technology we're using today.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Huh. So, you know what? Well, okay. So, like, what challenges do you face related to adaptive sports?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that you have to think about from an adaptive sports perspective. There's not a lot of gymnasiums or places that are accessible when it comes to getting in, having access to the facility. They may have a basketball court that is available to the general public, or if we're talking about a YMCA or even a university, those facilities are dedicated to their programming. So having access to a place that is accessible from a standpoint of just having access to a gym is one issue that you run into. Cost is another thing you have to think about. The wheelchair rugby chair that I use is about $7,000 to $8,000 that's not covered by insurance. So that's another aspect of access to adaptive sports. And then thinking also along the same lines of facilities is when you have a facility that may have a gym that is available to you or accessible to you, then you have to think about the physical accessibility side of it as well. You might have access to the gym, but are the restrooms accessible? And do they meet the needs of all of your athletes? So that's one of the things, especially being out here in Pittsburgh, everything's built on a hill. So you might have a gym that is a great facility that has a beautiful court, and they're willing to host you, but it might not be an accessible facility that meets the needs of all of your athletes. So it's tough to find something that is accessible in every way, shape, and form, from physically accessible from time frames, and then also accessible from a cost perspective.
Right. Yeah. And accessible bathrooms, that's a big issue in a lot of places too. Like restaurants is a big one for a lot of wheelchair users, I know, as well.
Yeah. And
so that's a big problem for sure.
For sure. And, if you look at Pittsburgh as an older city as well, the YMCAs, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the community centers that were built pre-ADA, so before the 1990s, you're not going to find an accessible bathroom that's maybe even on the same floor as the gymnasium. So, that's an issue that we run into a lot.
Yeah. Oh, that's awful.
So, well, you know what? You talked about how young it was when you got involved. So, I mean, are there opportunities for kids to get involved of all ages, or?
Absolutely. So here in Pittsburgh, we have a couple of different sports that have junior programs. So the Mighty Penguins, which is sled hockey, has a juniors team. And then the Steel Wheelers are partnering with the Hope Network and have developed the Steel City Swish, which is our junior basketball team. When it comes to rugby, you have to be a certain age. I think the age is 12 or 14 now, that you have to be that old to play, but you're playing with full-grown adults. So, the age range for wheelchair rugby is, 12 or 14 all the way up to 70 years old, as some of our athletes are still playing in their 70s. So, It's a wide variety of ages that you see in rugby. But when you get into some of the wider sports, I'll say, because rugby is for quadriplegics or individuals that have disabilities in forelimbs, so the pool of athletes is much smaller. Where you look at basketball that has amputees and paraplegics and other disabilities, you have a wider pool of athletes, so you have more opportunities for junior programming.
Okay, and like, what would be the youngest age in one of those?
Oh goodness, I think the Steel City Swish has like 6 or 7 year olds that have come out and played.
Oh, that's
So
great.
Wow.
it is an opportunity for young athletes to really get involved from a young age and really find a lifelong love of adaptive sports.
That's great. That's really great.
Amazing. So, how do the adaptive sports programs impact local communities?
So it's in multiple ways, Phill. So that's a great question. So from a community standpoint, disability community, it really is more like a support group. So that's, you're going to learn a lot of the things in life from your fellow athletes. It may be, how do I cath myself, or how do I do this, or how do I do that? And you can learn everything you can learn in rehab, but rehab stays are getting shorter, unfortunately. So you're not learning everything you need to know in rehab.
Right.
And depending on what your disability is, you may not have had an inpatient rehab stay like individuals that have new spinal cord injuries. So you're learning things from your fellow athletes. But from a global community perspective, it's a great opportunity for individuals to get involved. So we have a lot of physical therapists and doctors that are interested in adaptive sports that don't have disabilities that are participating and helping our community grow as adaptive athletes. And then from the even more global aspect of adaptive sports, it gives something that people can rally around. I know one of the things that people are all excited about the Olympics, and then they forget the Paralympics happened 2 weeks later. But we really saw this year that the able-bodied Olympic athletes have really rallied around the idea of the Paralympics and really have chosen to be a voice where traditionally the Paralympics haven't had that able-bodied voice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is it maybe a reflection of the wider understanding and maybe recognition of disabilities in the wider society that we live in? Do you think maybe?
I think so, and I think even though the able-bodied athletes also have disabilities in some cases, what we saw 4 years ago with Simone Biles coming out as being a person with a disability, I think they're really starting to connect with their pride and being part of the disability community, and they're supporting the athletes that have the Paralympics as their opportunity to participate in sports. So individuals with mental health disorders and different mental health conditions, and as well as some physical health conditions that wouldn't classify them as an adaptive athlete participating in the Olympics, they're really cheering on their brothers and sisters that are participating in the Paralympics. So I think that's part of it, is that sense of community within the disability community, and seeing the greatness that we have with the Paralympic Games as well.
Right. And, I don't know if you were following any of this during the Olympics, but I remember there being some reports about Katie Ledecky having POTS. And I think that might have been a big push as well as part of it all. For sure.
Absolutely. It's these high-level mainstream athletes that are, I'm going to say, finally identifying as people with disabilities and talking about it, that has really put the focus on disability as a mainstream topic. And really, it's kind of just moving along with the Paralympic movement, that these Paralympic athletes are able to say, hey, Katie Ledecky, hey, Simone Biles, we are your brothers and sisters in this. We're all fighting the same fight. And I think it's becoming that sense of community, as I mentioned.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you could tell us about the Paralympic movement? Anything else that would be a broader scope, I guess? Yeah,
and I think we're seeing it with the advertisements and the switchover. And I can't remember how many years ago it was, but it became the the USOPC, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. So it used to be the United States Olympic Committee, and then it was the United States Paralympic Committee, two separate committees, and now they've come together, and the advertisements and the sponsorship are equally distributed from a naming perspective. I'm not sure if the funding is equally distributed anymore. We're still working through that. But when Delta comes on and they say, we're the proud flight sponsor of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, where I think prior years before it was the USOPC, Delta would say, we are the proud flight partner for the United States Olympic Committee. And then 2 weeks later, we would see, we're the proud sponsor of the United States Paralympic Committee. And now it's really bringing that mainstream, and even the advertisements that we're seeing from Delta and McDonald's, and name another big sponsor for, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, they're highlighting both Olympic and Paralympic athletes in their advertisements, even during the Olympics.
That's really interesting. Do you have any insights as to why this is becoming a little bit differently thought about generally? Is it maybe a change in, the generational
so I can't say for sure why it is, but I think so. My background, as you mentioned in my bio, was education, working in youth as a youth specialist and working with kids with disabilities and looking at transition and all of those other things. And really, there's been a dynamic shift in education as well, where we're seeing kids with disabilities in the mainstream classroom and kids with disabilities that are participating equally with their peers, and moving away from that segregation in the schools. We still have segregation, still have a long way to come. But I think the able-bodied individual, or quote-unquote able-bodied individuals, I know you all can't see me, we're air quoting over here, but the individuals without disabilities are really seeing that aspect of inclusion, and they're growing up with their peers with disabilities. So as they're going through in sports, and as they're going through every other aspect of life, career, work, community, they're looking around and they're saying, I went to school with kids with disabilities. I graduate. They don't just disappear. It's not this phenomenon that people with disabilities just disappear at the age of 18 or 21. So I think it has a lot to do with that community looking around and saying, where is my brothers and sisters with disabilities? But I think it also has to do with things like podcasts and YouTube and TikTok, and name a social media platform. That really has given the voice to people with disabilities and brought disability to the mainstream as well.
Right. Yeah. And I know this is a little bit off topic here, but, we're also seeing it a little bit more in Hollywood, kind of this, push to make sure that, the characters who are disabled are played by disabled actors, right? I mean, RJ Mida, of course, in Breaking Bad, or, in Doctor Who, I actually forget her name right now, but the woman who was in the last season of Doctor Who was a wheelchair user. I can't remember her name. I'm really sorry about that, but
if she's listening, let us know, right?
She's like I was telling you the other day, she's even in the Loki show.
Right.
Yeah, she's all over the place, man.
And since we're getting so off topic, I'm just going to keep going and say that as a big Disney fan myself, there's a lot of problems with Disney right now. Please don't write me any hate mail. But even in the animation, you're seeing the inclusion of people with disabilities, and even the individuals that are voicing the animated characters with disabilities are also people with disabilities. So if you've seen Wish, great example there. Dahlia is a person with a disability in the movie, also voiced by a person with a disability. I'm waiting for an animated Disney movie about adaptive sports to bring us back to today's topic. You're welcome, Phill. You're welcome, Ray.
Yes.
Oh man, I am losing my train of thought here.
You're just so excited about adaptive sports. I get it. I haven't seen you all the time.
It really is.
Well,
So I will say, while we're struggling for our thoughts and questions, you can't stop me from talking. So I know what you're wanting to ask is it being both from Philadelphia. Phill, I know you have your roots and your ties here to Pittsburgh, but I understand that you are not a Steeler fan, but I won't hate you for that on today's podcast. But the rivalry is real. We have the Pittsburgh Steelwheelers has a rugby team, as I mentioned. The Philadelphia Eagles, which is out in Philadelphia, their rugby team. We go to toe. So there is a love-hate relationship in adaptive sports as well. So that black and gold runs deep here in Pittsburgh. And I will say that when our basketball team plays Cleveland, we know that Cleveland is a great team for basketball. They have this little team called the Cavaliers. I think that's the name of their basketball team in the NBA. But I will tell you that, we don't like Cleveland even when we're playing basketball. So, it's the rivalry is real amongst adaptive sports. And I will say that in wheelchair rugby, when the U.S. plays Canada, again, love my brother and sister-in-law up in the neighbors to our north, but there is no way that we will cheer for Canada when we're playing them in wheelchair rugby. So that's the story.
No. Oh, Lord. Okay.
All right.
I guess that's about it. I mean, was there anything else that we had on our list of questions that we wanted to ask?
I don't think there was. So I think I'm going to just go to the towards the end of this. Matt, is there anything else you wanted to talk about or anything you wanted to plug for yourself?
Honestly, all I can say is check out your local adaptive sports organizations. If you all are listening from the great city of Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Steelwheelers is a great opportunity for individuals with physical disabilities that are looking to get involved in wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby, or hand cycling. There are other great adaptive sports organizations in the Pittsburgh area. If you're interested in curling, the Pittsburgh Curling Club has a beautiful facility that was just built in 2020, and it is fully wheelchair accessible. We would love to have you out. Please come try curling, wheelchair rugby. If you're in the other parts of the states, there's also opportunities. I will give one plug for Philadelphia. You're welcome out there in Philly. But the McGee Adaptive Sports Organization does a wonderful job with all things adaptive sports.
Oh, okay.
So if you're interested in wheelchair rugby, wheelchair basketball, I'm sure they have a lot of other sports out in the Philadelphia area as well. But McGee does a wonderful job with their adaptive sports organizations. We need to work on the middle of the state. I am tired of driving 5.5 hours to play rugby when there's a wonderful city right there in the middle that we could pause in and all meet in the middle to play some rugby. But that is up and coming. So stay tuned. Adaptive sports are ever changing, but again, Pittsburgh Steelwheelers and Pittsburgh Curling Club here in Pittsburgh, and then out in the Philadelphia area. I do come out every once in a while to curl. The Bucks County Curling Club is a great place there. I believe it's north of Philadelphia. My Philly geography isn't great, so but Bucks County Curling Club is a great club out there in the other side of the state as well.
Oh, well, that's great. So, well, thanks everyone for listening in. I want to take a quick second to just thank Highmark Whole Care for sponsoring our podcast again. And thanks for listening and have a great day.
Good night.
Thanks, Matt.
Absolutely.
Please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org. You can find us on social media at Disability Pride PA on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.